Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread. I'm Messianic Torah, and this week's Parashat is the 12th Parashat of the book of Bereshit, also called Genesis, and it's called Vayechi, which means "and he lived." And this week's Parashat starts in Genesis or Bereshit 47:28 through 50:26, with the half Torah being in 1 Kings or Aleph Melech 2:1 through 2:12. And my message for 2014-15 is called Looking Ahead. In this week's parasha, we see, of course, this time. It says the Yaakov's time to die drew near, and so now he's going to have his request not to be buried in Mitzrayim, and he's going to bless Ephraim and Manasseh, and then he's going to bless all of his children. And so it's centered around this concept. That's actually interesting because we've seen this little pattern before. Now the parashat is called "and he lived," but it's really about Yaakov dying, right? And we saw this with Sarah's life, and yet it was really about her death. And so this pattern kind of should spark you to think along those lines of life and death, and that's my first bullet point, is life and death. Now it's an interesting thing. People don't. Death is something that people don't like to think about or talk about, but the reality is, you know that it's going to come. As the old saying goes, two things, that you can count on are death and taxes, and it's interesting because it has been appointed, for every man to die, but we get an interesting situation here with Yaakov because it says his time to die drew near. Now, he's not dead yet, right? If we look at this on a linear line, we can see you have your birth on one side, which is a starting point, and your death, on the other side. Now, if we look at this, when you're dead, you're not going to change anything, okay? You've lived your life. When you're alive, a lot of people feel like stuff's going to go on forever, right? It's this ignorance is bliss. Like, they never imagined, they were going to die. Everybody who dies around them seems, usually the first thought is, oh, that's unexpected. Maybe not in the case where somebody's really old, which then takes us to this kind of the mechanics of what this means. Yaakov's time to die drew near. Well, when do you start to become aware that you're going to die? Usually when you get older, right? Older person knows they're not just going to keep going on forever. And so they're still alive, but they're aware of death. And actually I think there's great wisdom in that, and I think there's a lot of benefit. Because what Yaakov does then is he knows he's going to die. He's thinking in the future, but he still has time to act today, knowing the future is coming. And this is a problem that a lot of religious people don't have. They're not living, and non-religious people, is they're not really living their life today in accordance to what's going to happen in the future. If they knew, and it's all even written in there. It says, "Many come to me in that day saying, Lord, Lord." And he says, "Get away from me, I never knew you, you who do lawlessness." This is a prime example. Okay? And they're like, well, didn't we cast out demons in your name? Didn't we do all this? Right? These were people who thought they were going to be good with God when God returned. Okay? And come to find out, they're not. And the fact that you can read about that in the scriptures, it forewarns you. So if you're wise enough to pay attention and go, wow, the deciding factor of whether or not I was allowed to be around Messiah or not was whether or not I was breaking the Torah, breaking the law, whether I was keeping the commandments or not. So now if I know that, and Messiah hasn't returned yet, and I know that I'll be rejected if I'm breaking the commandments, then I can focus on learning and keeping the commandments now, so that when I'm there, I won't be rejected by Him. You see, that's simple. It's laid out very simple. But that's that forward thinking, being aware of the future. And that is this concept of looking ahead. And it's a very powerful, important thing, because if you're thinking just in today, and ignoring what's coming, then you'll be foolish. It says the wise man, sees evil and hides himself. Okay? The fool carries on and is punished. Because he's ignoring what he's seeing in front of him. And it's the same way. If you don't, you reap what you sow. And if you don't sow, right? If you're lazy and you don't sow, when winter comes, you'll have no food. You'll starve to death. You had to know winter was coming. That's why you're planting now, so that you can have a crop then and a harvest, so you'll have food when you need it. Okay? And if you're living just hand to mouth and you have no thought for the future, then that's a problem. Then you're going to be subject to every trouble that comes along in the future. And many of them are coming, but you don't want to think about it. Death is the same way. So, knowing, as Yaakov did, that he's going to die, he's going to go and bless his children and also tell them what's coming for them as well. And this is a very interesting place to be, because he's able to, where he's at, to look forward, right? That his death is coming, and he's able to look backwards and know all the stuff that he learned, all the stuff that he'd been through. Now, kids, your children, they weren't there with you when you were growing up. By the time you're having kids, you've already went through a big chunk of your life. And it's interesting, just an observation, that I noticed that a lot of times, I think about my father, and I don't know that much about his life. I know him from when I started interacting with him. But that's the second half of his life. I don't know everything from before him, or his father, everything he knew about his father, which was only about half of that life. And that takes us back to the Torah, right? We're reading these messages and learning all these things about people that have gone before us. And we're blessed to be able to actually see them as children, like when we learn the story of Yaakov and Esau, and we learn about all the people, Avraham and Yitzhak and Ishmael, and we can see what happened before him. We can see him as a child, what key events happened to him as they were growing up, and we can learn from that. And we can also know that those create patterns and a trajectory, that the patterns are repeating themselves. And so you can determine where you want to be in that pattern. You can look at the mistakes and say, I don't want to make those mistakes of Israel. You can look at the good things and the challenges and say, oh, when I get myself into that challenge, I want to make a good decision just like so-and-so did, because they were blessed, because they made the right choice. Or I don't want to make the choices this person made. It was wrong. And so this is what's important. It says, Yahuwah says that he made the covenant with Avraham because he knew that Avraham would diligently teach his children. That's a pretty big statement. Everybody's trying to attach themselves to this promise made to Avraham, but very few people actually look at one of the key deciding factors of why God even made this with him. And that's a big factor, because then you better look at the way you're teaching your children and what you're doing with them, because that was a deciding factor for whether or not the person was able to get that covenant with God. And some of that goes into this week's Parashat, where we see of what it means to both be a good son, right, to be a child of God, and as we talked about in last week's Parashat, to be like your father, and then also how to be a good father and teach your children. And this is about securing the future, right? Because if people say, well, we're the seed of Abraham. Okay, and Messiah said, well, then you'd have Abraham's works. So Abraham's works are tied directly to Abraham's generations. And so when you see, it's not just about, Abraham had Yitzhak and Yitzhak had Yaakov, and then the children of there, all the way down through the timelines down to you. It's not just that. According to Messiah, it's also can be traced Abraham's works, his choices, his judgment, and his following the will of God can also be traced as a bloodline all the way through down to us. And so that shows you how important it is, how your righteousness and how your actions and your works are either continuing the life of Abraham, bringing him current today, and even then teaching it to your children so that it continues to further on the next generation. All that's very significant stuff. So next point we talk about is son's son. So Yisrael said he didn't even think he was going to see Yosef, and now he's seen his seed also. That's a big deal, because in a way, when you think about the wisdom that Yosef, or that Yisrael has, he's seen everything and been through everything that he's been through on his life, and he's learned from Yitzhak, his father, things that Yosef may not be privy to, and so if you and may not understand. So the fact that his position in particular, when Yisrael and Yosef, his son, are sitting together in a room, there's greater wisdom in Yisrael. He's seen more. He's got a longer view of what's going on than Yosef, even based on just age alone. And that comes, about the wisdom being tied to the hoary head or the gray hairs. The time of life, that there's things more you've experienced and more you've observed. And so part of passing that on to your kids is understanding that wisdom source. And so now we have this situation where he's able to see not only Yosef, but Yosef's children. And when we talk about reassurance and the reassurance of death, like as a father and a parent, you want to be able to know that if you died, what would happen to your children, right? I mean, are they able to, maybe you were the main source of income. What would happen to them? Are they going to be able to survive if you died? Have you taught them in the right ways? Spiritually, are they going to be able to survive? Are they just marginal in their interest in the Torah, and just did it because you made them do it? Or have you helped create that love for God and His Word in their hearts so that even when you're gone, they'll pick it up themselves and they'll drive themselves to do Torah study, and they won't fall away and they won't be lazy? Because with a lot of people, I can tell you, even if they are into the Torah, they're leaving their children behind. They're ready to run off and do a Bible study with other men and be a pastor or a rabbi and all this. And you can go talk to their kids, and their kids don't know hardly anything about the Torah. So here's dad who's the zealot, but he's not zealot. He's not transferring that zealousy into zealousy, is that a word? His zealousness into his children, and making sure that they have that. Because I see that all the time. People kind of, the kids are, be quiet and sit down and listen. But there's no drive. All the thing that they're doing with the Torah is being kind of forced upon them. And even then, how many, pastors or preachers, they're, again, I can sit down with their wives, with the rabbi's wife, and she doesn't know the Torah that much. She'll remember a few things she's heard and just from being around it, but not a lot of depth of knowledge there. And the children, I can ask most people, I can go to a Messianic congregation and I could probably sit down, the whole congregation will start at the children, right? The parents, we could start at the members of a congregation and I can ask them to list me the 10 Commandments in order. Probably less than half are going to be able to say that. I mean, come on, guys, that's the foundation. Those are the basics. That's the ABCs, literally. And yet, we got Davidic dance, and we're saying prayers in Hebrew, and all this and that. But how did you not get the basics? That's how bad it is. It shows you how fluffy the information is, and how they want to talk about this, that, and the other, and all these things, but they don't even have the basics down. And then out of that group, now if half of them can't even tell me all 10 commandments in proper order, then what do you think their kids can do? Are they going to do better than their parents or worse? It's going to get diluted, right? So what are you left with? Like, then you line up all the kids and say, okay, line them up all by themselves so they can't hear and look at everything, and just grab them and say, hey, tell me the 10 commandments. I don't know how many of them would know it. And this is the basics. Like, of all things there are, why don't we at least know the basics of the entire Torah before we start going on to other things? And, again, you can go up to all the speakers and the rabbis and all that, right? Line up their kids. Find out what they know. It says you'll know a tree by its fruit. Okay? Then line up their kids and see what they know. And see what you learn about them, about the parent. Because a lot of times they're so busy working in someone else's garden that their own field hasn't been planted and hasn't been cared for. And there's no food there. But they're the food giver. It should be the other way around. It should be a reflection. Yeah, I make these videos mostly for my children, so that they'll have that stuff. But I'm teaching my children. I'm talking to them about the Torah. And if other people want fellowship with me and do all this, hey, that's great. But my primary responsibility is myself and my wife and my kids. And, as it says, judgment starts at my house. So that's where we learn the Torah. And I could pull up one of my young kids, 5 and 6 years old, and they know more about the Parashat, and they know more about the Torah than the rabbi who's teaching in front of your congregation. I can tell you that right now as a fact. They can tell you what happened, all the bullet points of what happened in what Parashat. They can tell you the 10 commandments. They can also do Hebrew prayers if they want. I mean, this is a point of embarrassment. Okay? That it's because we study, right? The workman's worthy of their hire. If you study the Torah, you will know the Torah. If you don't, you know bits and pieces, and you just gather it because you saw this DVD, or you got this email from Israel, or at the congregation someone said this, and you clapped, oh, good message. You didn't do that study. And you didn't even do a study to follow up and see if their study is correct. So how can you evaluate them? You don't. You just got to believe whatever they say. They can, as long as it seems legitimate, you'll go with it. But the problem is tons of lies and garbage theology can seem legitimate. I mean, that's the problem. It's not like oh, lies are obvious. Bad theology is obvious. Some of it, very little of it is. But most of it, the people trying to promote it did a study. And they're going to show you, well, it says this, even though they're taking that out of context and they're doing this and they're doing that. But you might not know that because they're doing more work than you are. So you just look at their work and go, well, it looks like you did all the work on that study, so it must be right. Now I know something. You don't know something. To know something is to have intimate knowledge of it. That would mean that when you hear someone else tell you something, but you haven't studied it for yourself, you don't actually know that. Right? Knowledge is a security. It's a closeness. Right? Adam knew Hava. That's the model of a man and a woman, the two becoming one. Okay? That's different than if you say, well, I know that woman because you see her. That's different than that being your wife and you having relations with her. Those are two entirely different situations. So you can look at a woman and say, well, I know her. You don't really know her. You've seen her. You've observed her. You've heard of her. But you don't know her. And that's the same with the Torah. If you hear something about the new moon, and they're breaking all that, You don't know about the new moon. You actually didn't do the study. You just watched and observed somebody else's study. But that's not knowledge, because you don't know what they included in, what they didn't include in that study, what they eliminated, what they tested, right? It's just like you looking over at someone else's paper and saying, well, I know the answer to that problem. You don't actually know the answer. You see the answer. But if I asked you, right, to know it, right, then show me how you got there. Show me the work. Show me the formulas you used, right? Like with math, when you used to have to draw it out and show the long work of, like, long division. There's a difference from knowing the answer is 4.735 and actually knowing that I took this divided by that, and that made this, and this dropped down, then I dropped this down and did the math again, and that gave me the 6, and then I drove that, and right? That's to know it, which means, hey, you give me the problem, I can solve it. But if you just looked on somebody else's paper, you don't know it. You don't actually even know the answer. Okay? You can copy the answer, you can see the answer, but you don't know the answer. Okay? There's meaning behind these words. And in knowledge and knowing something is different than being aware of something. Okay? Or observing something. That doesn't mean you know it. And that's how a lot of people treat this. So now we go back to this concept of sons. And Yaakov is able to see his son, Yosef, not only know that he's okay, which is a double entendre, a double meaning, knows that he's okay and that he's alive, but all these are double meanings. Life is observance to the Torah, which is doing the will of God. So to know that your son is alive in the Ramez or spiritual definitions would be to know that they are keeping the commandments of God and doing His will, and that they will continue to do that. That you can look at their trajectory because you've seen them since they were a baby, and you can see the choices that they've made, and you can see where they are, and you can predict what the likelihood is that they're going to continue. Where's that path going to lead? If they're not really consistent and they're not really following God, and you're having to stay on them about everything, and then they don't really have it and aren't really self-motivated to follow God, then you can know if you, which are the only positive influence on them, is removed, that they'll go down and slide down. And I can tell you that's not just with children. There's people who I know that I've studied with and friends that I feel like, wow, there was times when we studied and we were, digging into the Word and, talking about it and doing messages. And consistently across the board I can see that when I no longer hang out with those people, that they're not studying the Torah that much, they're not doing as much, they're not being, pushed to do, and they don't. And slowly they slide further and further away. It's like it talks about backsliding Israel. And that's what happens. It's like when Moshe went up on the hill, he went away. What happens? What happened to the people? He was the source that was restraining them, that was driving them to obey God, that was correcting them just like a parent. And when they were away, the children weren't ready to be without a parent. That parent is their mercy. That parent is the one that's ensuring that they're going to continue to make progress until they can stand up on their own 2 feet and be the source of their own inspiration, the source of their own correction, the source of their own motivation to follow God. And that's a tough thing. I've done that. I'm doing that with my children, trying to grow that with my children. But I've done that with adults, grown men. And there's times where it was like, hey, we're getting together for Torah study, or hey, we're doing this and that. And then, they stop coming by, or they move further away, or this and that. And every time I meet people, I'm like, hey, how's your Torah study? And most of the time I know the answer. Even if they're like, oh, it's okay, or they're like, oh, I'm not really doing anything. Rarely is it, oh, it's great. I was just interesting. I was just studying this. What do you think about that? That's showing an active, right, involvement in the Torah. And then you have your active involvement in the Torah, and you're like, hey, great, let's have a conversation. Hey, that's funny, I was thinking this about that. Or, did my study recently this week, and I'm thinking about these things. Right? And that's why it's so important. You gotta understand, it's like that's that basic model of being a parent. Okay? And for some people, you gotta grow up. There comes a point when, you have to wipe your own butt, right? You can't wait for your parent to do the basic things for you, right? That's part of growing up and being an adult, is you got to learn how to provide for yourself and take care of yourself and keep yourself from making stupid choices. And, sometimes you make some and you realize the consequences. Well, a lot of that protection was happening when you had that person who was an influence, a positive influence, who was looking out for you more than you were looking out for yourself. That's why I designed my Torah study system. Okay, not only did I design it for myself, so I'm taking care of myself, so that I'm in the Word of God every day. I made it for my kids, so that they're in the Word of God every day. And then it's able to be of help to other people. Anybody can use it. Anybody can contact me and say, hey, I'd like to use your system. And people have. And I say, okay, well, let me email you the PDFs, and here's how it works. And even out of that, few people come back and say, okay, I'm using your system here, and I wrote this message, and what do you think about this? I was doing the brackets and the bullet points, or can I get some help on that and all this and that? Silence. Right? So it's a numbers game. You start with all these people, right? Say all these Messianics, and then it filters down to how many people are then interested in a Torah study system, and then out of that, how many people are really using it consistently, and then how many of those people are looking to advance, their studies and take it to another level. You go from all this to almost nobody. So when it says, if the righteous are scarcely saved, what then of those that do wickedness? Right? That's an illustration of, here, if all of this, that's actually saying the righteous, a small group of people, is scarcely saved. Then what are the people who do wickedness? So you're getting that big, right? It's a big filter. All the way down. Okay? That's what that illustrates. That's the mechanics. And I have found that to be true. I've met many people over the years. Okay? I've had huge numbers of people who follow me on social media. I've got almost 20,000 people on Twitter and probably 7,000 or more people on Facebook. And then out of that, the same pattern falls true. How many people engage with you and talk with you about the Torah? Small group of people. How many people leave a comment or like your post? Small group of people. How many people want to have a conversation about what you just said? Small group of people. Right? And what comes out at the end? How many people have I met that I consistently have conversations with, and we talk about the Torah? Right? How many people? Out of all this big group of people. Okay? So that's how it works. So those patterns are repeating patterns. I can tell you that I believe it to be true. And so when a person even starts, many people who I've studied with personally, I always say that everybody finds a way to fail. They find an excuse or a reason to sit down and be tired, or to not keep going and not be consistent. There's great, like it says, go to the ant, you sluggard. Right? Who, having no leader, gather their food. Right? They consistently do what they need to do to survive. They're going to live in the winter because they've stored up crumb by crumb by crumb by crumb. That's your Torah study. That's why I designed it the way that I did. Is because crumb by crumb by crumb, you'll accumulate understanding and knowledge and refinement. And hopefully you'll live more and more of the Torah and have a deeper understanding so that you can even live more of it and you can teach it to your kids. But how many people will just, you talk about a famine, people are already starving. And you're providing a crumb of food or a shovel that they can work or seed that they can plant. If they'll just do a little bit of work, they'll be able to feed themselves. And people refuse. Even when all the tools are given to them. Even when food itself is given to them. They don't take the time. I mean, my normal messages, my full messages, run about an hour. My longest one was about 2 hours. Trying to break a record. And I remember because one of the people I'm connected with said, 2 hours? Really? Who's got that much time? I thought that was just such a funny comment. I was like, I'm sorry. Now I try and stay within a timeline. But generally I would just hit record and whatever I have to say, I have to say. And if it happened to go long because there was a whole bunch of information that I wanted to share, then it went long. But see, the back of my mind is, I think, it reminds me of, it's like kids when they get tired. They can't stay up. They just don't have the stamina to stay up. And they just kind of conk out, and you have to pick them up and carry them to their bed. You're like, even sometimes you're going someplace, you're going to a fun event and all that, and something that the kids would want to do, but they wear themselves out, and they don't even make it through the whole thing, and you go, oh, okay, they're tired. For me, I don't get tired about the Torah. When I do my messages or whatever, I press the red light and I start talking. I don't have it written out in some script or anything like that. I can talk about the Torah because I study the Torah every day and I care about the Torah and I love the Torah. And so I have something to say about it. You put enough in, right? The spaghetti factory wants to, like Play-Doh, you put the Play-Doh in, you squish it down, it has to go somewhere, it squishes out the other side. These videos are squish out of the other side, okay? Because that's going to come out. You put in, it's going to come out. If you don't put much in, you don't have much to say. So it's important to understand that like I was saying, the length of the videos. So I said, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, that was my longest message and all this. But a little part of me inside is thinking, who cares? If this information was good, if I found somebody who was studying the Torah and had some compelling information that I found to be useful and high quality, I've got audiobooks that I listen to. They're 7 and 11-hour books, most actual books. I don't look at it and go, wow, this is 11 hours. As a matter of fact, some of my favorite authors, it's like, I want more. I can't wait till they write another book. Give me another 11 hours because I love the information and its quality. But it comes down to, like, I started doing my summary messages at 10 minutes because I was like, oh, well, I know people, an hour might be too big of a commitment for them. To me, I feel that's sad. This is an hour talking about Torah. Yet they'll easily spend an hour watching something stupid on TV. Easily. Most shows are an hour. They're going to watch CSI Miami for an hour, which does them no good. They'll watch, the Olympics come around. People watch the Olympics. They don't even care about these sports. Like, that's a funny thing, because yes, it's the Olympics for Olympics' sake, but you're like watching speed skating. You actually personally have no interest in speed skating. But because it's the Olympics, all of a sudden you'll spend an hour invested in something you don't even care about. And so for me, it's like, those things are insignificant. Those are not important. And we spend an hour doing all kinds of stupid stuff. People play a video game for an hour. People will vacuum their floor for an hour. But, hey, listen to the Torah for an hour. That becomes something that's too extreme. And so I chopped them up into 10-minute summaries. So now for the people who 1 hour is too much of a commitment, Well, Mama Bird will chew it up and give you a little piece, so that you could survive. Here, 10 minutes. Commit 10 minutes to it. And now actually I have my new series, which is Living the Parashat, and those are 5-minute videos. Okay? And I don't doubt that eventually, I've got, one of my goals is to take these bullet points of the Torah, because most people aren't reading the Torah throughout the week. I'll tweet them out. How about 140 characters? Can I get 3 seconds of your attention to just look and see, hey, this is what's going on in the Torah today? Like, that's the lowest bar. That's somebody who's in a spiritual coma, and we're just putting fluid in them through an IV, just dripping a little bit of nutrients to keep them alive, because they're unable to eat for themselves. I mean, this is the state where people are. And study and the scriptures is kind of like muscles. Okay? If you go to the gym, and you don't normally go to the gym, you'll realize the gym will just show you how weak you are. Because you'll go to do a few exercises and you go, oh, this is too hard. Great example. If you want a quick test of your fitness, just go on YouTube and look up P90X. Okay, it's a workout program. P90X3 is the newest version of it. There's one called, if you Google P90X3 accelerator, there's a video on there it's got a person who's working out there in front of their TV. It's a thing there, but you can see the video, and it's 30 minutes, and it's no weights, nothing like that. And I will be surprised if you can last 10 minutes in that video. It's not that it's like crazy and they're like, okay, let's do this, let's go. It's not like that. It's really a funny thing, because I remember the first time that I did it, I thought, okay, this is just going to do this. This is easy, because the gym was actually closed, and so I thought, well, I'm going to do something at home here. And you get in it, and years ago I did just the assessment, which is just like let's get a baseline for where you're at and show you some of the basic movements. I couldn't finish it. And it was just crazy. It was a lot harder than what I thought, because it's kind of like how people treat golf. They go, oh, golf, that's such a stupid thing. You see all these professional athletes, and they come up and they think they're just going to whack the ball and it's going to go a million yards out there, and then they realize how much skill it takes and how hard it is when they hit the ball, and they can't even hit the ball. They're swinging the ball and they're missing the ball. And that's when something they thought was easy, and hey, I'm just going to run up and show these guys how dumb this is, and then they have a reality check, and then that irritates them, that what they thought they could easily do was actually a lot harder than they thought. And then that's why you see so many of these professional athletes that play golf, because it becomes something that irritates them, because they thought they should have been able to be better at it really easy, and they think they can just enforce their will on it and be great because they are great at other things, and they don't realize that it is difficult. You have to learn it, and you have to pay your dues, and you have to spend time and learn to master it, and that irritation takes them all the way to where eventually they become good golf players, because they will not, their competitive nature will not allow this little ball and this simple sport of getting that into that hole over there make them look stupid. Well, it's the same way spiritually. A lot of people think they've got it already down, or they're doing pretty good, and I might challenge that. I don't think I have it down, and I'm working hard at it. And I look around and I think there's a lot of people who are doing a lot less, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the famine is in the land, and people are starving to death and they don't even realize it spiritually. So this is important for us to just think about, put all these things in perspective, and step up and grow those muscles. If one tweet is all you're able to endure, then read it and be encouraged by it, and then try and step yourself up and go, I'm going to commit myself to listening to a 5-minute message during the week about how I can live different parts of the parashat, and then, hey, I'm going to do a little study of my own here. I'm going to spend 10 minutes once a week is a great start. And then, hey, can I do that twice a week? I mean, it doesn't have to be big, but you have to be moving forward and growing and strengthening your spiritual muscles. And then you might get to the point where you say, oh, wow, I'm willing to listen to a message for an hour and have it challenge me and have it provoke my thoughts. And I'm going to study along with it and be inspired to go study and do my own studies and things like that. And then eventually you may come up and I may get an email from you that says, hey, I'm interested in your Torah study system because now I want to read the Word every day and I want to think about this Word every day and all that. You don't get there overnight. I've spent years, I started just like everybody else with no knowledge and no understanding of it. And then I picked up the Bible and I read the whole Bible from cover to cover, and then I started going back and studying it and looking at all these different things, and that natural trajectory, right, brings me to where I am today. And if I'm consistent, and that's been one of the most number one ingredients, then I can look forward and know and feel secure that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I'll accumulate a deeper understanding of it and hopefully be refined by it and be more righteous and grow in understanding. Because if you're doing the work, you can expect the harvest, right? You plant it, you watered it, you're taking the weeds out, you're caring for it, right? It says these are our responsibility and that it's God that will give the increase. If you do those things, God will give you the increase. Okay? So studying the Torah, right, is the best work you're ever going to do. And God will give you that increase over time. And it accumulates. So now back to this Torah portion, we have the son's sons. So now Yisrael gets to see Yosef. He's seen him since he was a baby, knowing his trajectory. Yisrael has all of his knowledge from growing up, plus what he saw from his father and what he learned from before him. And he gets to take all of that knowledge, plus what he knows about Yosef, and he can make a prediction of where is Yosef spiritually? How is he lined up with my will? And how is he lined up with the will of God? And do I think he's going to be okay? What do I think is going to be his trajectory? And then he's able to see his sons and see, okay, now I get to see my son and see, okay, do I think he's going to be okay? But he already has sons. And I can see how he's developed them and how much of my will transferred from me to him and from him to his sons. That's a huge blessing to be able to see your son's sons and to be able to be alive and take part in that and ensure the strength of that growth, of that branch, and to know that you were the strong foundation and that the next piece was strong and that even the smaller piece was strong and that you can expect it to keep expanding and growing and being strong. That's about being secure in your future. Before you die, you can rest in peace knowing that you've done your work and you can expect that harvest. That you've done your work. He's done his work with Yosef. And Yosef has already been fruitful. And now, spoiler alert, he has Ephraim and Manasseh. And Ephraim gets the bigger blessing, and Ephraim means fruitful. Because there's meanings behind that. Right? And Manasseh means forgotten or forgetful. Well, we know what's going to be greater. Are they going to forget his father and his ways and his will, or are they going to be fruitful? And this shows us that they're going to be fruitful. It's also a small pattern and a sub-pattern of what's going to happen to the northern house of Israel. They'll be forgotten, Lo Ami, right, who was first, but yet in the end they'll be fruitful, and that fruitfulness will be greater than their sin that caused the curse on them. So we see that even in their names, and some of that. So this is a way, when you look at your son, to see your future, to look back at what you know and then transfer that knowledge into your son, and then see the trajectory of where that will take your son. And that is your son is your future, and your son's sons. And so it's important to understand those things. So we talked a little bit about trajectory and wisdom, and this also shows why studying Torah matters so much. Because now we're talking about a student's perspective, right? The trajectory in wisdom, the more you have plotted out behind you, right? The more points, if I plot a point here, and then the next point is here. Now if I have to make a prediction of the third point, right? I would say, laws of physics, something in motion tends to stay in motion. We can't predict a change, though we know that change is a factor. But what we can say is that we can look at what's happened before and know that people are habitual. So if I have to make a prediction, I'm going to say that he did whatever he did before. So if the trajectory is going this way, my next prediction would be down here. If the trajectory is going this way, my next prediction would be there. Now it's very difficult if I have only 2 points to go from. But let's say that I'm mapping out 2 points and a third point and a fourth point. Every additional point becomes another witness to tell me that I can expect, with 20 points going like this, that the 21st point should be right up there. Right? It becomes easier and easier to predict the more data you have. Well, let's apply that to the Torah. The more you understand Torah, the better you're able to know the unknown. The better you're able to predict. The more patterns you understand, the more you get out of a small piece of information, because that piece of information fits somewhere, and then you get all the other pieces and you can predict what else it's connected to and how it all works. And then you can relate yourself to that in relationship to that. And a deeper knowledge of Torah. Torah interprets Torah. Right? So people talk about theology and even this morning one of my Facebook friends posted on there that he was tired of people basically interpreting the scriptures and I didn't talk to him about what he was exactly meaning. I didn't know if he was being very literal, and okay, let's just study the literal Torah and let's not try and interpret it. Or I didn't know if that wasn't what he was saying and he was just talking about people who are making bad interpretations. But, there's a lot of people who feel like, the Torah is only literal, but, that's easily disproved. And I think that's a poor way to look at the scriptures. As a matter of fact, I think that's how the Pharisees tended to look at the scriptures, and that's why they were missing the part. The outside was clean, the inside was full of death. They didn't get that it was a 2-part thing, that the Torah is 2 parts, just as man is 2 parts. He formed him with the dust of the earth, and then he breathed into him the breath of life. It says once he did that, it says then he became a living soul. So if you're talking about a living soul, then you must know it has 2 parts. And if you start to go, well, can't we all just be living souls? I mean, all we are is the dust of the earth. Let's just focus on that. There is nothing else. Well, then that's just not true. Because what made you was 2 parts. The 2 parts came together into one being. So if you're looking at that being, you're also looking at the 2 parts combined. And if you start to say that the Torah is just literal, then you've got a problem. I mean, it's easily disproved, both in the Old and the New Testament. There's plenty of examples that the Torah itself will teach you that the Torah is not only literal. But, like Karaites and different theologies, they want to say it's only literal, and they're confusing. Are there bad interpretations of the scriptures where people are falsely interpreting it? Yeah, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't say, well, there is no spiritual interpretation because I have examples of all these bad spiritual interpretations. That's just laziness. It takes more effort to say, well, there has to be ways to test and prove and see what spiritual interpretations are accurate. And there is. There's a whole series of tests and things that you can do that to nail it down. You know that if you study long enough. And if you study the scriptures. But if, and I'm not going to go too deep into that, that's for another video, but, it's just like the baby when they want to cut the baby in half. Okay? You cut the baby in half, it's not just a physical thing where, here, you get 50% and you get 50%. The baby dies if you do that, because the baby is not just physical. Okay? There's life inside it, and you can't remove that life and think you still have something. And that's the way the Torah is. But when we look at the Torah and we realize that each of our studies plots out and gives us deeper understanding, then the Torah, the more we know of Torah, the more we're able to know of Torah. And the more we study Torah, the more accurate and self-correcting our interpretations will be. Because if we take the context of the whole Torah in play on every piece of the Torah that we study, then we realize that I need to know more pieces. I need to solve more pieces of the puzzle. It gets easier to solve the more pieces you've already solved. You've eliminated those pieces and you've revealed more patterns and what's going on, and it becomes easier and easier to put in the pieces to the puzzle. So it's important to understand that this is why we study the Torah. Because if you have a couple of points, right, you only know a little, right, those people a lot of times are the most zealous. They barely know anything about the Torah, but they think they've got it all figured out. And then they're going to make a DVD, or they're going to start teaching other people, or hey, I'm not even 30 years old, but I'm going to go out and become a rabbi, right? Or I'm going to create a podcast. I mean, I see sometimes, zealousness is good, but a lot of times that young, ignorant zealousness, it's not tempered with wisdom and with experience. And so what happens is, those people run out and they want to come up with theologies, and they don't have enough data. So they're really guessing, and their theology is all over the board. Over time of a lot of study, it should help clarify, especially if you're humble enough to accept that what you know may be lies. That's the key ingredient, because there's a lot of people who study a lot, think they know a lot. They've studied other men's studies instead of doing their own studies. And they think they've accumulated a lot of knowledge, but it ends up they're actually shutting their own eyes and becoming blind to the truth because of the way they went about it. So there's definitely a way of going about it. But the student's perspective is what brings us wisdom and helps that trajectory. The more you know, the more you study, and the more effort you put in, the easier every other piece is to figure out. And that's why I can hear things that I'm not familiar with. One of my friends will say, I've obviously read the entire Bible, so it's not like I've never heard of it. Like, oh, I didn't read that book, the book of Ruth or something like that, right? I've read it all. And I've studied a lot of it, and I've focused mostly on the Torah. But if someone says something that I haven't spent a lot of time doing more in-depth studies on, they say, well, this story about blah, blah, blah. And I'll go, yeah, kind of, let's hold up. Let's look at it. But I'm not going to say that I've studied that and done 5 studies on it if I haven't. And I have all these things that I think about it. But even when I don't know it that much or haven't done studies on it, all the other stuff I've studied starts being hundreds of tests that test the theory that they're telling me and tells me if that's in alignment with the whole Torah and the whole Bible or not. And that solves a lot of things. And so many times I'm able to understand something that I don't understand better than the person who thinks that they understand it, because of the more broad study of all of the Torah and all the patterns that it creates and all the things. And then you're able to go, well, what about this and what about that? And they're, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that wouldn't work out. So it's important. Next, we get into the interaction of people and events. So it's not just about you. You see, all this stuff, right? Because it's not enough that Yosef only knows what he knows. And he's now observed his children. He doesn't know everything about his father. And he doesn't know everything about his father's father. And there's certain things, and he hasn't been alive as long as Yisrael or Yaakov. And so, it's like you don't know what you don't know, and that creates the problem. That's the problem with children. They don't know what they don't know. And so it's important to understand that it's not just, yes, you develop yourself, it's what you know. You look back and read. That's why we study the Torah, of what happened and what the patterns were before us, right? And how God interacted with his people before, so we can predict how he would interact with us in the future, or with our children or children's children. And then you realize that, yes, it's about you getting yourself right, but also, were you a good son? Did you know your father's will? Are you doing it? Also, are you neglecting your sons? Because it's not just about you being righteous and then you've neglected Him, because then you're going to die, and all that knowledge is going to die with you. That's one of the reasons I make the videos. If I get hit by a truck tomorrow and die, I've got my teaching and understanding of every one of the parashahs here for my children to sit at my feet and listen to and watch, even though I'm gone. So I've left them an inheritance. I haven't left them destitute. That's a piece of assurance and security. And that's me looking ahead. And that's one of the reasons why I do it. It's not to be famous or to sell DVDs or to be all these other things that I see a lot of other people doing. Messianic teachers who are teaching for teach's sake, who are teaching for glory and teaching for money and all these other things. This is what I believe. I didn't prepare this to be a bestseller. I'm talking about something and sharing what my studies have found and what I think about it, and these are for my children. So this is, I'm preserving what's up here for my kids, and I would recommend people do the same for their kids. So next we get into the concept of old thinking. So now in this week's parashat we get to the point where Yaakov's going to die. Of course, he tells all the different things that are pertaining to each one of his sons. And then we get to this concept, back to the story of Yosef, where Yosef's brothers fear that now that their father's dead, Yosef's going to, come do them. And this is kind of reminds me of a dog returning to its vomit. I see one of the great turning points was when Yehudah offered himself up for Benjamin. Before, they weren't going to offer themselves up. They weren't thinking about how hurting Yosef, killing him or selling him away would hurt their father. No mention of that. Okay? But now they've changed. Now they're thinking along the lines of their father, and they're lining up with their father, and they're being true sons. And so that's where Yosef reveals himself to them. And now we're getting to a point where they're kind of reverting back a little bit, because their fear for Yosef, right? Yosef, if you remember right, was the father's favorite from the beginning. So if their father wouldn't hurt them, why would they think Yosef would come and hurt them? For that to happen, Yosef would have had to have been faking it, right? Kind of reminding us of Esau and saying, I'm comforting myself that when my father dies, I'm going to kill Yaakov, right? So he's putting on this fake facade and this show for his father, knowing that he's really going to go against the will of the father as soon as the father's dead. And that's a powerful and important lesson for us to understand. Because unlike that, Yosef actually was doing the will of the father. And in a way, it's kind of reflexive, because that may be how they were. Maybe they were doing what they had to at various points, going to their father and acting a certain way. Meanwhile, they were the ones that, bringing him the coat, saying, oh, here, and acting all sorry and sad like they loved their brother, when really they hated their brother and had cast him away and sold him away. They were being two-faced to their father. And so if their father was gone, they no longer have to lie, and they'd resort to who they really were. But Yosef wasn't that way. Yosef was his father's son. And he wasn't going to change when his father died. And that's a very important element we have to learn from that. That's what it really means, looking ahead. That's that whole thing of, oh, it'd be great, let me see my son, right, before I die. It's that assurance to know and see and go, okay, when I'm gone, I know what's there in my son, and I know what then he'll be. And I can rest in peace knowing where it is. Whereas if you're a liar and you're trying to pretend to be one way, or a father hasn't actually transferred it and they've been one way and they haven't taught their son diligently, then when they die, they don't know what's going to happen. That influence, just like I said before, is no longer with them, just like the people I've studied with. When my influence was no longer with them, there was congregations I've gone to where we agreed that, and we talked about it and said, okay, it says don't bake or boil, on Shabbat. And so we didn't have hot food, and we didn't have hot coffee, and we didn't have any of that. It was all, if we were going to do food, it was cold food and drinks. And then when I left that congregation, because they wanted to, it stopped being a fellowship where everybody was studying the Torah and going and sharing messages, and it ended up being, oh, well, this is my building and I'm going to do what I want and I'm the leader and I'm going to, I have to prove your message and all this and that, all these type of things where I was just like, hey, that's not for me or my family, okay? We're here, we're men, we're looking each other eye to eye, and everybody should be involved and nobody's greater than the other. And when that changed, I took my family and said, all right, love you guys, but I'm out of here. I'm not going to go into this way of the Nicolaitans, and I'm not going to start, wearing a talit and saying the Father's name the way you want me to say it in order for me to get up and speak. Like, that to me was insane. I'm not going to be disingenuous to God to please man. So I left, and we did our own home fellowship since then. Just like Abraham, if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. We can just separate in peace, because I disagree with the concept and the direction. And that's, again, I was just looking ahead saying that's the way that never works, and that's the wrong way to do religion. So that example, though, when I left, what happened? They went back to eating, they got all their crock pot foods and they got their hot coffee and all this and that. And it was weird for me because some of the families that made up that congregation, like, we'd already talked about it. I pulled out the studies and gave the logic of why I thought this, and they were in agreement. So how can you be in agree that, okay, we think this is wrong and this is a violation of God's commandments, and then go back to it? Well, it's because, and that's the sad part, when I left, I realized that I was the driving influence for them doing that. And when I left, they slid back to the cares of the world, right? How many times have right, there's food laws. Even the first sin was over a momentary desire to eat something, not have self-discipline, okay? So that's a big deal. And to see a whole group of families and a whole congregation return like a dog to their own vomit, to something they'd rejected at one point, and then after they knew all the reasoning, and then go back to it. To me, that's just sad. It was really sad. And I visit the congregation every now and then, and when I go there, I usually would show up afterwards just to kind of fellowship with the people and talk to the people, not necessarily to be a part of the congregation or to do all the songs that they sing, because I don't believe the lyrics and I don't believe the theology that's embedded in a lot of the stuff that they were teaching. But love the people, and hey, I want to encourage the people and chat about Torah and all this and that, as long as I'm welcome. And the thing is that it felt like every time I was coming there, and then I'd always come afterwards where they have all the food and the hot food, and they're plugged in, and they've got stuff cooking in the oven, and they're like, well, we're just reheating it, we're not baking it, it's already been baked once, as if that mattered. It's like, look at the dial, it says baked. What do you think you're doing? You're applying the heat to it, and it's just self-justification. But when I smelt that hot food and all of that, it just made me feel uncomfortable. And it reminded me of when I think it's in Jeremiah, when he's like, what's that sound, when they're commanded to kill all the animals and everything, and they are like, no, we're going to provide an offering, and he's like, what is that sound I hear? He's hearing the sound of animals that should have been killed. And that's how I felt every time coming to the congregation, smelling. What is that smell? That's the smell of hot food. And you're singing and dancing to Yahuwah while you're disobeying him. And that aroma, I just have to imagine, is a stench in his nose in the same way it's a stench in my nose. I have no interest in it. And it's just kind of, it goes back to this same kind of feeling that I have here, where it was like, here Joseph's brethren are afraid because from their perspective, right, they don't understand what it means to be a true son. Because Joseph was a true son the whole time. He was like his father. And he was doing good things in the will of his father and the will of God. You don't have to worry about him. That it was all a big facade, right? And now he's going to attack them. He had the power to attack them when he wanted, and he chose not to. Okay? Because that wouldn't be in the will of his father. They were the ones that wanted to kill their father's favorite son, with no regard to their father's feelings, because they weren't being good sons. So it's interesting that at the end here, after he dies, we get this little thing, which really helps us think about how will it be, you know? What is our current influence on ourselves? What is our current influence on our children? What is our current influence on others? And what happens if we weren't there? You know, I've thought about it before. And we have a home fellowship. What if I didn't spend my time making these videos? Would you have the ability to hear different perspectives? You know, what would happen? What if I didn't create my Bible study system? Would people not study? Not be able to use it and just not study? If I wasn't, you know, encouraging people. And that tells you that, you know, it reminds me of a Matisyahu lyric when it says, he says, "Don't take me soon, because I'm here for a reason." You know? It reminds me of that in the sense that it makes you realize that a father doesn't want to pass on knowing that his children would then take a step backwards and would fall and stumble. And that's the encouraging part when you're doing stuff and being an influence on other people, is that you're hoping that you'll lift them up like training wheels. You're supporting them, you're helping them, but you're hoping that when those are gone, they don't fall over and crash. The purpose of the training wheels is that you learn to ride and balance. And when they're ready, then you can pass on. Then you can be removed. And now they're going on their own. And that's the real sense of security. It's not like people who are selling DVDs and all this, and they want to know the hottest new theory, and they want to learn stuff before anybody else so that they can, you know, sell them stuff and be lifted up and look at this guy and all that. They want to be important. You know, what would be great is not being important. You know, it'd be great if Moshe didn't need to be there, because the children of Israel had it down so well. They were going to be exceedingly righteous if he went up the hill. If he never came back, their trajectory was going to be, you know, a ladder to heaven. You know, straight up to God. They were going to do a great job. Like that would be great. You know, I remember as a manager, I've managed different businesses in my life, and as a manager, there's really two kinds of managers. There's the one who's super aggressive. I knew the type. I'd run into them all the time. They're telling everyone what to do, and they're the center of all things, and everybody's on their toes around them because they're all in everybody's face. But the problem is, when they're not there, the store doesn't run very good, because they've made themselves so important that without them, people are only doing it because they're there, and because they're so in their face that they demand excellence. And the minute what they didn't do is they didn't develop, they didn't teach, and they didn't train people to be excellent, to desire excellence from themselves. When I used to manage stores, I could literally have a person come in as a training manager. They could come into my store and I didn't need to be there. My store would run perfectly without me. I was not needed because I developed and trained people. And when a new person got hired, I didn't need to take them through orientation. I could just put them in with my crew, and my crew was so good that they would show them everything that needed to be done, and I knew it was showed the right way, and they were eager to do an excellent job. Two totally different styles of management. One where you become unneeded and one where you're the source of all productivity. And it's the same in the spiritual world. You're not seeking your own glory or your own name. You're hoping to encourage, lift people up so they can stand on their own feet and be incredible. That's what we learn from this parashat. You know, the ability to look ahead is to grow, to build what's behind in your knowledge, and that gives you a trajectory to be able to see where you're going. Know if that's in the right place. Know if that's good to see your children, and know if that's in the right place. So I hope this message has been a blessing to you. And please like and share and leave comments. That helps the video, because the whole group of people who follow me don't even see my videos unless they get enough likes and shares, and then the algorithm sends it out to the people who already want to see it. So it's a horrible design the way Facebook is set up, but so I appreciate your shares and your likes and your comments, and subscribe to us, and we'll be bringing some new stuff to you. Look for our Living the Parashat, and I'm developing our website, loveoftorah.com, to constantly add new features so that it can be a great resource over time. But I'm only one person, so it takes time to develop all the little sections. I'm still working on all of them. Anyway, till next time, I'm going to say shalom.